I will not let you take them! Leave my family alone!
I have my orders. Pay what is due, or out you go!
Vivienne Marshan had gone to the Bell cottage carrying 2 loaves of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a little jar of honey. Before the morning ended, she would stand in the middle of a muddy lane, accuse the Duke's steward of allowing a child to starve, and speak words she believed might cost an entire family its home. What she did not know was that the Duke himself had stopped nearby and heard every word. The morning was bitterly cold in Ashenden, with a thin mist lying over the stone cottages, and only a few chimneys sending smoke into the grey air. Most families in the village could not afford to burn wood every day, and Vivienne had learned to recognize which houses had gone without heat by the dampness clinging to their windows. At 23, she was the only daughter of Dr. Marshan, the village physician, and possessed neither wealth nor position enough to command anyone's attention. What she did possess was an inconvenient inability to look away when suffering stood directly before her. The Bell cottage waited at the far end of the lane, smaller and poorer than the others, with a sagging roof and a crack running down one wall. Even before Vivienne knocked, she heard a baby crying inside, a weak, exhausted sound that tightened something beneath her ribs. Mrs. Bell opened the door only a few inches. "You should not have come, Miss Marshan." "I brought food," Vivienne replied. "Please let me in." The cottage smelled of damp wood, sickness, and an empty hearth. A young child sat silently beside the cold fireplace while the baby lay upon folded rags on the table. Its cheeks were hollow and its small hands curled against its chest. Vivienne uncovered the basket and placed the bread, cheese, and honey beside the child. "Touch a little honey to the baby's tongue, then soften the bread in warm water. I shall bring milk from our goat tomorrow, Mrs. Bell covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Your family has already done too much." "Not enough if the child is still hungry," Vivienne said after Mr. Bell, and learned that he had gone to the stream before dawn, hoping to catch something the family might eat. Their oldest son had gone with him, while the other children searched the winter woods for berries that everyone knew would not be there. She was still considering what else could be done when the sound of hooves reached the cottage. Looking through the small window, she saw Mr. Kell riding toward them with a leather ledger beneath his arm. He was Lord Ravensmere's steward, the man who collected rent, recorded debts, and decided which tenants might remain upon the land. Vivienne stepped outside before he could reach the door. Whatever happened next, Mrs. Bell and the children did not need to witness it. "Mr. What business have you here, Miss Marshan?" "I brought the family something to eat." His thin mouth tightened. "An unwise kindness. The Bells owe 5 months' rent. And if people are encouraged to believe charity will protect them from consequence, they will never learn responsibility. The baby is starving. The rent remains unpaid. Have you seen the child?" "I have seen the ledger." "Then the ledger has seen less than I have." His expression hardened. "You forget your place." Vivienne's fear was real, but anger proved stronger. "Then tell me whose place this is. Is it yours to stand before a starving family and discuss figures without once entering their cottage? Is it the Duke's place, though he does not know of the child who died here last spring?" Mr. Kell went still. Vivienne continued before caution could stop her. "Mr. Bell was ill throughout the winter and could not work. His wife walked through snow to find a physician who refused to come without payment. Their daughter and died in April because they could not afford medicine. And now another child is wasting away while you speak of 5 months in a book. My duty is to the estate." "Then your idea of duty is incomplete." Her voice had begun to shake, though not from weakness. "You say this family owes the Duke. These people have worked his land, paid his rents, and buried their child beneath a wooden cross while no one at Ravensmere Hall even knew her name." Mr. Kell's cheeks reddened. "This estate has rules. Without them, there would be chaos." "Then let there be chaos," Vivienne answered quietly. "If order requires a baby to starve, I would rather answer to God for chaos than for obedience." She did not know that farther down the lane near the churchyard wall, a man upon a grey horse had stopped to listen. Had returned from London the previous evening and ridden out without informing his household. He wished to see the estate before his steward had time to prepare it for inspection. Hearing raised voices, he had drawn rein beneath the bare trees, remaining unseen while Vivienne told Mr. Kell precisely what she believed the Duke owed his people. If you turn the bells out, she continued, I shall take them into my father's house. We have little enough ourselves. But I would sooner see our roof collapse over all of us than watch another child die because your ledger contains numbers and no mercy. Mr. Kell gathered his reins. I shall report every word of this conversation. Then report it accurately. I withdraw nothing. He rode away with what dignity he could preserve. Only when the sound of his horse had faded did Vivienne allow herself to breathe. Her hands trembled. And for one moment she wanted to sink into the mud and weep from the force of what she had done. Instead, she returned to the cottage and helped Mrs. Bell feed the baby. The Duke rode in the opposite direction before anyone could see him. At Ravensmere Hall, he entered his study, closed the door, and sat alone without ringing for tea or summoning his steward. Vivienne's words followed him into the silence. The debt runs the other way. That evening she confessed everything to her father, expecting fear or reproach. Dr. Marshan listened quietly beside the fire, then covered her cold hand with his own. You spoke the truth, he said. If the Duke's men come, we shall meet them together. No one came that day nor the next. On the fourth morning, however, a village boy arrived carrying a letter sealed with the crimson wax of Ravensmere Hall. The message requested Vivienne's presence before the Duke on Friday afternoon, and stated that her father might accompany her. She read it 3 times before sitting down. Her father studied the seal, his face grave but steady. You need not go. If I refuse, the bells may pay for what I said. Then I shall go with you. Vivienne looked again at the Duke's crest, the hawk in flight above a crown, and felt the first cold touch of fear. She had refused to show in the lane. Somewhere inside Ravensmere Hall, a powerful man knew every word she had spoken against his estate. On Friday, she would have to speak them again to his face. The carriage from Ravensmere Hall arrived precisely at 1 o'clock on Friday. Vivienne had expected something grand enough to remind every villager of the distance between a duke and an ordinary physician's daughter. Instead, the carriage was elegant without extravagance, its coachman greeting both her and Dr. Marshan with quiet courtesy before helping them aboard. Neither father nor daughter spoke much during the journey. Vivienne had spent 4 days imagining every possible outcome. At best, she expected a stern warning never to interfere with estate affairs again. At worst, she feared Mr. Kell had already persuaded the Duke that she was an insolent young woman determined to stir. She resolved upon one thing before the carriage reached Ravensmere Hall. Whatever happened, she would not apologize for telling the truth. Ravensmere Hall rose above the surrounding parkland like something untouched by hardship. Its honey-colored stone gleamed beneath the pale winter sun, while broad terraces overlooked ancient oak trees stretching toward the distant hills. Everything spoke of generations of wealth carefully preserved. Yet as Vivienne stepped inside the great entrance hall, she noticed something unexpected. The servants were efficient. They were respectful. But they were not happy. No one smiled. No one spoke unless spoken to. The house felt orderly rather than welcoming. She wondered, not for the last time, what sort of man inspired such careful silence. A butler led them into the Duke's library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves surrounded the room, interrupted only by tall windows overlooking the frozen gardens. A fire burned steadily in the hearth. Philip Ravensmere stood beside the window, one hand resting lightly upon the mantelpiece. He turned as they entered. Dr. Marshan, Miss Marshan. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Vivienne curtsied. Your Grace. I appreciate your accepting my invitation. I was not certain I had much choice. To her surprise, the faintest hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. No, he admitted. Perhaps not. For several moments, silence filled the room. Then Philip spoke. I should begin by making one matter perfectly clear. I was present outside the Bell cottage on Tuesday. Vivienne looked up sharply. You heard? I heard everything. Her face flushed with embarrassment, though not regret. In that case, she answered steadily, there is little point pretending otherwise. No. There is not. Philip walked slowly toward the desk before opening Mr. Kell's account book. I have also read my steward's report. He placed the ledger beside another bundle of papers. The 2 accounts differ rather remarkably. Vivienne remained silent. My steward informed me, the Duke continued, that you encouraged tenants to ignore their obligations. He lifted his eyes. That is not what I heard. Dr. Marshan spoke for the first time. My daughter has never encouraged dishonesty, Your Grace. I know. Philip's answer came without hesitation. I believe she encouraged compassion. Vivienne had prepared herself for accusation. I owe you an apology, Philip said at last. The words were spoken so simply that neither she nor her father answered immediately. I have trusted reports without asking whether they reflected the lives behind the numbers. He looked toward the frost-covered gardens. My late father always insisted that a duke should know his people. A shadow crossed his expression. I fear I have known my ledgers better than my tenants. Vivienne studied him carefully. There was no defensiveness in his voice. No wounded pride. Only honest disappointment in himself. She realized then that the man standing before her bore little resemblance to the uncaring landlord she had imagined. The Belt family will not be evicted, Philip continued. Their rent will be suspended until Mr. Bell is able to work again. Relief flooded through Vivienne before she could hide it. Thank you. He shook his head. Do not thank me. I am correcting a mistake that should never have existed. Then he asked the question that surprised her most. Will you tell me about the others? She blinked. The others? The families Mr. Kell has failed to mention. For nearly an hour, Vivienne spoke. Who secretly shared what little bread she possessed with children whose parents had even less. She spoke of old Mr. Fletcher, whose failing eyesight prevented him from working despite years of loyal service to the estate. She described young Tom Bell, bright enough to read every newspaper he could borrow. Though he had never spent a single day inside a proper schoolroom. Philip interrupted only to ask names, dates, and details. Not once did he question whether she exaggerated. Instead, he filled several pages with careful notes. When she finished, he quietly closed the notebook. I have lived here for almost 11 years. And today I have learned more about my own estate than during all the years before. Over the following weeks, Ravensmere changed in ways that astonished the entire village. Mr. Kell found many of his responsibilities quietly transferred to other officials, while the Duke began visiting cottages without advance notice or ceremony. He listened far more than he spoke. Sometimes he stayed only a few minutes, sometimes an hour. By the end of each visit, another injustice had been corrected. A widow received firewood before the first heavy snow. An elderly tenant's rent was reduced, and repairs long ignored finally began. No public announcement accompanied any of it. The Duke seemed almost determined that the changes should speak for themselves. One afternoon, as winter sunlight settled across the gardens of Ravensmere Hall, Philip found Vivienne tending several neglected rose bushes she had quietly begun restoring during her visits. You make a habit, he observed, of improving places that others have overlooked. She smiled without looking up. I could say exactly the same of you, Your Grace. For the first time in many years, Philip laughed. It was quiet, unpracticed, but entirely genuine. And though neither of them recognized it yet, that simple moment beneath the winter sky marked the true beginning of everything that would follow. By the time spring yielded to early summer, the people of Ashenden had begun speaking. Of the Duke in a way they never had before. Noblemen occasionally toured their estates, usually to inspect fences or review accounts, or remind tenants of their obligations. Lord Ravensmere did something altogether different. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. More remarkably still, he remembered them. When old Mr. Fletcher mentioned that the bridge near his cottage became dangerous after heavy rain, stonemasons arrived within the fortnight. When Widow Cargill quietly admitted that she had been skipping meals so her grandchildren could eat, a regular delivery of provisions appeared without explanation. The Duke never spoke publicly of these acts nor allowed anyone else to praise him for them. Vivienne understood why. He was not seeking gratitude. He was trying to become the man he believed he should have been long before. Her own visits to Ravensmere Hall became gradually more frequent. Sometimes she came to discuss the needs of the village. Sometimes to deliver medicines requested by the housekeeper. Sometimes she suspected because neither she nor the Duke wished to invent another reason to postpone their meetings. The servants noticed the change before either of them did. Whenever Miss Marshan arrived, the atmosphere of the great house seemed lighter. Footmen smiled more easily. The maids no longer hurried away the moment their duties were finished. Even Mrs. Abernathy, the formidable housekeeper who had served 3 generations of the family, privately confessed that One afternoon, while Philip reviewed estate correspondence, Vivienne wandered into the library. "You have rescued my shelves," he observed. "I've merely returned what I borrowed. You also rearranged them. They were organized by size." They had always been organized by size. She smiled. Which made finding anything unnecessarily difficult. Philip glanced toward the shelves before laughing softly. "I cannot even disagree. You are becoming much easier to argue with." "I hope that is a compliment." "It is." The easy conversation lingered long after the books had been returned. Among the names Vivienne had shared during their first meeting, none remained more often in Philip's thoughts than young Tom Bell. The boy possessed a quick mind and an endless curiosity. Yet his family's circumstances offered little opportunity beyond labor in the fields. Remembering Vivienne's description, Philip arranged for the village schoolmaster to assess the child without announcing who had requested it. A week later, the report arrived. Tom learned twice as quickly as most boys his age. Philip established a small education fund for the children of struggling tenant families whose abilities would otherwise have gone unnoticed. When Vivienne learned what he had done, she found him walking through the orchard behind the hall. "You never told anyone." "I did not do it to be noticed." She looked at him with quiet admiration. "You are changing more lives than you realize." He shook his head gently. "No. I merely had someone willing to tell me where to begin." Not everyone welcomed the changes taking place at Ravensmere. Lady Prudence Ashcombe had known Philip since childhood, and had long assumed that one day duty would persuade him to choose a wife whose family matched his own position. She regarded her place beside him as almost inevitable. The growing friendship between the Duke and an untitled physician's daughter disturbed her more than she cared to admit. When she arrived at Ravensmere Hall for a summer luncheon, she observed everything with careful attention. She noticed that Philip asked Vivienne's opinion before discussing estate matters. She noticed how naturally they walked side by side through the gardens. Most of all, she noticed that he smiled more often in Vivienne's company than he ever had in London's grandest drawing rooms. Lady Prudence said very little. She did not need to. Some people preferred to fight openly. She preferred patience. As autumn approached, preparations for the estate's annual Christmas gathering quietly began. For generations, Ravensmere Hall had hosted a grand dinner where neighboring families, clergy, village representatives, and estate officials gathered beneath one roof. It was the most important social occasion of the year, and every invitation carried significance. One evening, Philip stood beside the drawing-room window, studying the guest list. "There is something I should tell you." Vivienne looked up from her embroidery. "What is it?" "Lady Prudence will be attending." "I imagined she would." He hesitated. "She can be exceptionally direct." Vivienne smiled with calm confidence. "So can I." He returned the smile, though concern still lingered behind it. "I know. And somehow," he admitted quietly, "that reassures me more than it should." Outside, the first snow of the season drifted gently across the grounds of Ravensmere Hall. Neither of them knew that the Christmas gathering would test everything they had begun to build together. Or that before the season ended, both would finally be forced to express the feelings they had each tried so carefully to hide. Christmas arrived beneath a sky the color of fresh snow, covering the grounds of Ravensmere Hall in quiet white. Inside, the great house glowed with candlelight, evergreen garlands, and the warmth of guests gathered from across the county. It was a tradition the Ravensmere family had observed for generations. Yet this year carried an unusual sense of anticipation. The villagers wished to see whether the Duke's growing friendship with Miss Vivienne Marshun meant what many had begun to suspect. Lady Prudence intended to discover something else entirely. The dinner proceeded with all the elegance expected of one of England's oldest estates. Conversation flowed easily until Lady Prudence, seated only a short distance from Vivienne, lifted her wineglass and spoke with deceptive sweetness. "Miss Marshun," she began, "I understand the villagers have become remarkably fond of you." "They have always shown my family great kindness," Vivienne replied. "How fortunate," Lady Prudence smiled. "It must be comforting to know one's influence extends so far, especially without possessing either rank or fortune." The conversation around the table faltered. She continued before anyone could respond. "I confess I have wondered whether the responsibilities of a great estate might someday require a duchess whose upbringing better prepares her for such duties." The meaning was unmistakable. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others waited to see how Vivienne would respond. For a moment, silence settled over the table. Then Vivienne placed her fork gently on her plate. "My lady," she said calmly, "titles may open doors, but they cannot teach compassion." Her voice remained perfectly courteous. "I have met people born into the highest ranks whose kindness honors those titles." She glanced briefly toward Philip. "And I have met others who believed birth alone entitled them to respect." Lady Prudence's smile stiffened. Vivienne continued without raising her voice. "If I have earned the affection of the people here, it is not because of who my parents are. It is because I remembered their names before asking for their opinions." The silence became absolute. Even the servants paused. No anger colored Vivienne's words. Only quiet truth. Lady Prudence realized too late that she had challenged the one person in the room who never mistook honesty for rudeness. The dinner ended politely enough, but Vivienne excused herself soon afterward. The conversation had exhausted her more than she wished to admit. She wrapped her cloak tightly around her shoulders and stepped into the snow-covered gardens, grateful for the stillness beyond the music and candlelight. Fresh snow softened every path. The gardens lay silent beneath the winter moon. She had scarcely reached the old stone fountain when footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. Philip stood a few yards away, his coat hastily thrown over his evening clothes as though he had left the ballroom without stopping to think. "You shouldn't have gone out alone," he said quietly. "I needed a little silence." "So did I." For several moments, they simply stood together while snow drifted gently around them. Finally, Philip spoke. "I should have stopped Lady Prudence before she ever finished speaking." Vivienne shook her head. "You could not spend your life protecting me from every unkind remark." "No." His voice grew quieter. "But I should have protected you from that one." She smiled gently. "You already did." I answered. "You listened." She stepped closer. "That has always mattered more." Philip looked toward the frozen gardens before speaking again. "When my father died, I believed a duke's first duty was to appear strong. I thought strength meant distance. I thought kindness invited disappointment." He laughed softly at himself. "Then you arrived and dismantled every certainty I possessed." Vivienne waited. He had never found it difficult to command a room. He had rarely found it so difficult to speak to one person. The morning outside the Bell Cottage. He smiled faintly. "I intended to dismiss everything you said. I failed. Instead, I spent every day afterward wondering why one woman could see my responsibilities more clearly than I could." He met her eyes. "You reminded me that an estate is not measured by its land. It is measured by the people who call it home." His voice became almost a whisper. "And somewhere along the way, I discovered that home no longer meant Ravensmere Hall. It meant wherever you were." Vivienne felt tears gathering before she could stop them. "You changed my life, Philip." "No. You gave me back the man I was supposed to become." He reached for her hands. "I have loved you for much longer than I understood." "I think," she answered through a quiet smile, "I have known that for rather a long time." He laughed. "So everyone tells me. I suspect everyone knew before you did." "I believe you're right." For the first time since they had met, there were no misunderstandings left between them. Only truth. Philip gently drew her into his arms as snow continued falling around the silent gardens. The lights of Ravensmere Hall shimmered through the trees behind them, no longer feeling like the distant home of an untouchable duke, but the warm heart of a family that had finally learned the meaning of compassion. Years later, the villagers would still speak of that Christmas. Not because of the splendid dinner or the distinguished guests who had filled the hall. They remembered it because it marked the beginning of a different kind of legacy. Under the Duke's guidance, Ravensmere became known not for the wealth of its estate, but for the fairness with which it treated those who lived upon it. Young Tom Bell grew into a respected schoolmaster whose education had changed countless other lives. Families once burdened by impossible debts found hope again, and every Christmas thereafter. The Great Hall welcomed tenants and nobility equally. People often credited the Duke for those changes. Philip always corrected them. "The first step," he would say with a smile, "was taken by a young woman who refused to remain silent outside a poor family's cottage." And whenever anyone asked him what had transformed Ravensmere more than new policies, improved harvests, or wiser management, his answer never changed. "It was kindness," he would say. Kindness spoken with enough courage to tell the truth.